The last human signal. Ziara sat in the dimly lit control room of the Solari defense station, her sharp eyes fixed on the radar screen. The room was quiet, except for the faint hum of machines and the occasional voices of other operators checking their systems. She had been doing this job for 2 years, watching space for enemy ships, pirates, or any unusual activity. But tonight, something strange happened. A small red dot appeared on her screen. It was moving fast, heading toward an abandoned planet on the edge of the Solari star system. Ziara frowned. "What is that?" she whispered to herself. She zoomed in on the signal, and her heart skipped a beat. The ship's design matched something from the old war records. It was human. But that was impossible. Humans had been wiped out 300 years ago in the Great War. No human ships had been seen since then. The Solari Empire had won, and humanity was nothing but a story told to children. Ziara's hands trembled as she checked the data again. The ship was real. It was old, but still active. She quickly turned to her superior officer, Commander Vork. "Sir, you need to see this." Vork, a tall, battle-worn Solari with deep scars on his face, walked over lazily. "What is it now, Ziara?" She pointed at the screen. "This signal. It matches an ancient human warship. But that's impossible, right?" Vork stared at the screen for a moment. Then he laughed. "A human ship? Don't be foolish. Humans are long gone. Probably a malfunction in your system." Ziara shook her head. "Sir, the data is clear. The ship is moving, and it's following an exact flight path." Vork sighed. "Even if it is a ship that's not human, maybe an old wreck, drifting in space." He turned away. "Ignore it." Ziara clenched her fists. Something deep inside her told her this was important, but no one would listen. She waited until the room was empty. Then, heart pounding, she accessed the classified archives. The war logs from 300 years ago. She searched for the ship's identification code. Her blood ran cold when she found it. The ship was called the Resolute. It had belonged to a legendary human fleet captain, one of the last warriors who fought in the Great War. But the logs showed this ship was destroyed during the final battle. Then how was it here, now, moving through space? Ziara's mind raced. If this was truly a human ship, it could change everything. The Solari Empire had taught everyone that humans were weak, that they had been crushed easily. But what if that was a lie? What if humans had survived? She knew what she had to do. If she reported this again, her commanders would cover it up. They didn't want stories of humans spreading fear among the Solari people. She had only one option. She had to see the ship for herself. Ziara's fingers moved quickly over the controls. She hacked into the station's hangar system, unlocking a small scout ship. She was a skilled pilot, trained for deep space missions. She could reach the human ship in a few hours. She put on her flight suit, grabbed her weapon, and slipped out of the control room. Her heart pounded as she walked through the empty halls of the station. If anyone caught her stealing the ship, she would be arrested or worse. She reached the hangar, climbed into the scout ship, and sealed the cockpit. Taking a deep breath, she whispered, "I have to know the truth." Then, with a push of the throttle, the ship launched into space. The cold darkness of space surrounded her as she raced toward the mysterious human warship. The closer she got, the more uneasy she felt. The ship was huge. It floated in the darkness like a ghost, its metal body covered in scars from ancient battles. It should have been dead, like the humans who once flew it. But then, Ziara saw something that made her gasp. The ship's lights flickered on, and her communication system crackled with a faint, broken voice. "Intruder detected. Identifying species. Processing." Ziara's heart pounded. Who was speaking? This ship had been abandoned for centuries. Or had it? Her screen flashed a warning. The ship's docking system was activating. Something was pulling her in. Ziara grabbed the controls, trying to reverse her thrusters, but it was too late. Her ship was being dragged into the warship's docking bay. She was trapped, and she had no idea what was waiting for her inside. The ghost ship. The silence was the worst part. Ziara sat frozen in her cockpit as her scout ship drifted helplessly into the massive human warship. The docking bay doors had opened on their own, pulling her inside like a beast swallowing its prey. Her fingers tightened on the controls, but nothing responded. Every system was offline. No engines, no weapons, not even communications. It was as if the ship itself had reached into her vessel and turned everything off. The moment her ship landed inside, the docking doors sealed shut behind her. Ziara was trapped. She took a deep breath. Stay calm. Panicking wouldn't help. She reached for her helmet, locking it into place. The ship looked lifeless, but that didn't mean it was safe. With a slow, steady hand, she pressed the emergency hatch release. The door hissed as it opened, revealing the eerie glow of flickering lights in the docking bay. She stepped out onto the cold metal floor. The air was thin, but breathable. That was strange. A ship abandoned for 300 years should have been a frozen tomb. Yet, here she was, breathing human air. Her boots echoed through the empty space as she walked forward. Dust floated in the dim light, weightless, as if time itself had forgotten this place. On the walls, old human insignias were still visible beneath the rust. Ziara had seen them in history records, the once mighty symbol of the Terran fleet. She reached out, running her fingers over the faded letters near the entrance. Resolute, she whispered. The ship's name. The same name from the war records. She shivered. It felt like walking through a graveyard, yet something was keeping the ship alive. Her eyes darted to the control panels near the airlock. Someone, or something, had powered up the docking system. Then she heard it. A sound so faint, at first she thought she imagined it. Breathing. Ziara's whole body tensed. She wasn't alone. She spun around, drawing her weapon. The sound came from the corridor ahead. A slow, labored inhale and exhale. She took a cautious step forward, every instinct screaming at her to run. But she had to know. She pressed a button on her wrist, activating her suit's scanner. The display flickered and showed a heat signature. It wasn't a machine. It was alive. And it was human. Ziara's breath caught in her throat. That's impossible. A shadow moved in the darkness ahead. Then, a figure stepped into the dim light. Tall, worn uniform, messy hair, deep, sunken eyes filled with confusion. A man. A human man. Ziara's heart pounded in her chest. Her grip on her weapon tightened. The man stared at her, his expression frozen between disbelief and shock. "You're not real," he whispered, his voice hoarse as if he hadn't spoken in years. Ziara swallowed hard. "Neither are you." Silence stretched between them. The hum of the ship's ancient systems was the only sound. Then he took a step closer. And for the first time in 300 years, a human and an alien stood face to face. The last human. The silence between them felt heavier than space itself. Ziara stood frozen, gripping her weapon tightly as she stared at the impossible. A living, breathing human. The man before her looked half alive. His uniform was faded and torn, his hair unkempt, and his face was lined with exhaustion. His eyes, however, were sharp, too sharp. They studied her with a mixture of disbelief and something else, something dangerous. "You," his voice was rough, cracked from years of silence. "You're Xelari." Ziara stiffened. No human had spoken those words in centuries. No human had even seen Xelari in that long. She kept her weapon raised. "And you're supposed to be extinct." The man gave a bitter, humorless laugh. "Yeah, so I've heard." She scanned him again. Her suit's readings confirmed it. He was real. Warm-blooded. Breathing. A human in the flesh. It didn't make sense. Ziara's mind raced through the possibilities. Maybe he was a clone. A ghost. A trick. But deep down, she knew the truth. This was no illusion. This was no trick. This was history staring her in the face. The human exhaled sharply, shaking his head. I must still be dreaming. Or maybe I'd finally lost my mind after all these years. Ziara took a cautious step forward. Who are you? The man ran a hand through his messy hair, as if remembering his own name for the first time in ages. Captain Dorian Kain. Terran Fleet. His gaze hardened. And this is my ship. Ziara's heart pounded. She knew that name. Dorian Kain. He had been a high-ranking captain in the last human fleet before their supposed extinction. According to history, he died 300 years ago in the final battle. His ship, the Resolute, had been destroyed. Yet here he was, standing, alive, talking. Ziara's grip on her weapon tightened. That's impossible, she said. You should be dead? Kain cut her off, smirking. Yeah, I get that a lot. Ziara didn't lower her weapon. How are you here? How is this ship still operational? This place should be nothing but dust. Kain sighed and leaned against the cold metal wall, looking as if the weight of centuries pressed down on him. Last thing I remember, the battle. We were surrounded. We had no chance. I gave the order to activate the ship's last defense system, a cryostasis lockdown. A desperate move. Ziara's eyes widened. Cryostasis. Kain nodded. Yeah. The entire crew went under. The plan was to wake up when the war was over, when it was safe. His voice darkened. But something went wrong. Ziara's mind whirled. This ship had been floating through space for 300 years. If Kain had been in cryo-sleep all this time then. She took a slow breath. Captain Kain. You might be the last human alive. Kain froze. His smirk disappeared. What? His voice was quieter now. Ziara hesitated, but there was no way to soften it. Humans lost the war. The Exilari wiped them out. That was 3 centuries ago. Your people are gone. Kain stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then he laughed. But it wasn't a laugh of amusement. It was sharp, empty, and cold. You're lying, he said. Ziara shook her head. I'm not. Kain's fists clenched. His breathing grew heavy. He turned, pacing, his mind racing. No way. That's not possible. We had survivors. We had fallback plans. There's no way the Exilari could have wiped us all out. Ziara stayed silent. What could she say? For 300 years, the Exilari had taught their children that humans were weak, that they had been erased with ease, that the war had been a glorious victory. But standing here, face to face with the last human, Ziara saw something that the history books had never mentioned. Something burning behind Dorian Kain's exhausted eyes. Something that Exilari had feared so much, they made sure no human ever lived to tell their story. Defiance. Rage. Survival. Ziara felt a sudden chill. The Exilari Empire had made one crucial mistake. They had left one human alive, and one was enough. But before she could say another word, alarms blared through the ship. Kain's head snapped up. What the hell was that? Ziara checked her scanner. A new signal had appeared on her radar. Her blood ran cold. Exilari warships. They had found the Resolute, and they were coming to finish what they started. Kain turned to her, his smirk returning, but this time, there was something dangerous behind it. Looks like I woke up just in time, he said. Ziara's stomach twisted, because for the first time in 300 years, a human was going to war again. The hunters arrive. The ship trembled, not from old age, not from failure, but from something outside. Something fast, something hostile. Ziara's scanner blared, her suit flashing red warnings. Multiple Exilari warships incoming. She didn't need to guess why. The moment the Resolute's systems reactivated, her people must have detected it. Now, they were here to erase history. Captain Dorian Kain, the last human, stood beside her, his face unreadable as he stared at the flickering displays. The ship's long-dead computers had awakened, recognizing him as their rightful commander. But the auxiliary fleet wouldn't care about that. They were here to kill him. Ziara turned to Kain, trying to control her panic. "We need to go. Now." Kain didn't move. His eyes remained locked on the screen, scanning the incoming warships. Then he did something insane. He grinned. "You auxiliary still use the same battle formations?" he asked, almost amused. Ziara frowned. "What?" Kain pointed at the radar. "I fought your kind before. You're predictable. See that lid ship? That's your commander. Take him out, the rest hesitate. You rely on orders too much." Ziara felt a chill crawl down her spine. He wasn't panicking. He wasn't afraid. He was analyzing, planning, preparing for war. "This is suicide," Ziara snapped. "This ship is 300 years old. We can't fight an entire fleet." Kain turned to her, eyes sharp. "Then let's hope your people made the same mistake they did back then." She blinked. "What mistake?" Kain's grin widened, underestimating humans. And then, the Resolute came back to life. The ship shuddered, lights flashing through its ancient corridors. Deep in the heart of the vessel, long-dormant weapons systems awoke, their targeting scanners locking onto the incoming fleet. The ship had been sleeping for centuries. Now, it was angry. Ziara's screen flickered. Ancient human battle AI had activated, detecting the auxiliary ships. But the ship's energy levels were low. It couldn't sustain a fight for long. She turned to Kain. "If we fight, we won't last. The ship's power cells are too weak." Kain cracked his knuckles, stepping toward the control panel. "Then we make this count." Outside, the first enemy shots were fired. Beams of blue plasma streaked through the darkness of space, closing in on the Resolute like hunting spears. A direct hit would tear them apart. Ziara braced for impact, but it never came. Instead, the Resolute's automated defense systems activated, generating a pulse shield at the last second. The enemy shots exploded harmlessly against the old human technology. Kain let out a low whistle. "Still got some fight left in you, huh?" Then, without warning, the Resolute fired back. The ancient ship's rail cannons roared to life, sending high-speed projectiles slicing through the auxiliary fleet. The lead warship, the commander's ship, took a direct hit, its shields shattering. For the first time in 3 centuries, auxiliary fleet felt fear. Ziara watched in shock as the enemy ships hesitated. The moment their leader went down, confusion spread through the fleet. Kain leaned closer to her. "See. Predictable." Ziara swallowed. This wasn't just a soldier. This was a warrior. And worst of all, he was winning. But then, a new warning flashed. Another wave of auxiliary ships was approaching fast. More than before. Ziara's stomach twisted. "They're bringing reinforcements. We won't survive another wave." Kain's expression hardened. "Then we leave." Ziara blinked. "What?" Kain's fingers danced across the controls. "This ship still has an FTL drive, right?" She hesitated. "Yes, but..." "Then we're getting out of here," Kain said. "Plot a course to the closest uncharted sector. Somewhere they won't follow." Ziara hesitated, but she knew he was right. Staying meant death. She quickly entered the coordinates. The FTL drive groaned, struggling after centuries of disrepair. It wasn't built for escape. It was built for war. The auxiliary fleet was closing in fast. Ziara clenched her fists. Come on, come on." The enemy ships locked onto them, preparing to fire. Then, with a final, desperate roar, the Resolute jumped into hyperspace. The auxiliary fleet's weapons missed, firing into empty space. The last human had vanished. For the first time in centuries, the auxiliary had lost a battle. And deep inside their war council, a single, terrifying truth spread like wildfire. A human had returned. The war awakens. The stars stretched into streaks of white as the Resolute tore through hyperspace, escaping the Celery fleet by mere seconds. Ziara let out a shaky breath, her heart still pounding. They had survived, somehow, but survival was not victory. Beside her, Captain Dorian Kain sat in the pilot's chair, his fingers still gripping the controls. His jaw was clenched, his expression unreadable. He hadn't spoken since they jumped. Ziara swallowed. That was insane. Kain didn't look at her. No, that was a test. Ziara frowned. What? He exhaled through his nose, finally turning to face her. His blue eyes were sharp, calculating. The Xilari didn't send their full fleet. They could have overwhelmed us in minutes, but they held back. You know why? Ziara hesitated. They didn't think we were a threat. Kain shook his head. No. They wanted to see how we'd react. They weren't here to destroy us. They were watching, studying. A chill ran through Ziara. He was right. If the Xilari Empire truly believed humans were extinct, why hadn't they obliterated the ship on sight? Because they weren't just chasing ghosts. They were hunting for something else. Ziara crossed her arms. So what now? We keep running. Kain's eyes darkened. No, we find out what they're hiding. He turned back to the ship's war archives, scrolling through ancient battle logs. Most of the data was corrupted. 300 years of decay had wiped out much of the ship's memory. But then, a single entry remained intact. Kain's brow furrowed as he played it. A grainy, flickering hologram appeared in front of them. An old admiral, battle-worn and weary, stared into the recorder. His voice crackled through the silence. If you're seeing this, then you are the last hope of humanity. Kain's breath hitched. Ziara leaned in, heart pounding. The Admiral continued. The final battle is lost. The Xilari are too many, too advanced, but there is one last move left on the board. The screen glitched, then revealed coordinates, a location deep in uncharted space. Humanity was never meant to be wiped out, the Admiral said. There was a plan, a refuge, a place where the last survivors could rebuild. If you are Terran, if you are still fighting, go there. Find them. Bring them home. The hologram cut out. Silence. Kain's hands slowly curled into fists. There were survivors. Ziara's throat went dry. This can't be real. If humans survived, why haven't they come back? Kain's expression hardened, because something stopped them. For the first time, hope and dread existed in the same breath. If there were survivors, then humanity wasn't truly gone. But if the Xilari had spent centuries ensuring no human ever returned, what did they do to those who tried? The ship's sensors suddenly blared. Ziara spun to check the screen. Her stomach twisted. Multiple ships incoming. She gasped. No, it's them. The Xilari tracked us. Kain's face was set like stone. He didn't flinch. Instead, he stood. Then let's see if I still remember how to start a war. Return to Earth. The Resolute cut through the darkness of space like a ghost from another time. Ziara sat in the co-pilot's seat, staring at the display. The ship's systems were barely holding together after centuries of neglect and battle. Energy levels were low. Shields flickered in and out. The engines groaned every time they pushed forward. But none of that mattered. Because for the first time in 300 years, a human warship was returning home. Ziara's eyes darted to Captain Dorian Kain. He had barely spoken since they made the jump. His face was set in stone, his fingers tapping against his armrest. She finally broke the silence. You sure this is a good idea? Kain didn't look at her. His eyes were fixed ahead. No. Ziara exhaled. Well, that's comforting. The ship's proximity alarms went off, flashing red. They were here. The Resolute dropped out of hyperspace, and for a brief moment, everything was still. Then, Earth appeared before them. Ziara's breath caught. The planet wasn't dead, but it wasn't alive either. The surface was scared, covered in massive craters from old battles. Cities that once stood tall had been reduced to shadows of their former selves. And above it all, a massive structure hung in orbit. A Xilari blockade station. Ziara's blood ran cold. They never left. Kain stared at the sight before him, his expression impossible to read. The home he had fought for, bled for, now a prison under alien control. He exhaled slowly. Yeah, that sounds about right. Ziara checked the sensors. We can't land. That blockade station will detect us the moment we... She stopped. The display showed something below the surface. A power signature. Something was still active down there. Kain leaned over, scanning the readings. Then his lips curled into a smirk. Looks like someone left the lights on. The descent. They had one chance. The Resolute was too large and damaged to land. Instead, they launched a stealth drop pod, hurtling toward Earth's surface like a falling star. The pod shook violently as it entered the atmosphere. Ziara gritted her teeth. This thing better not kill us before the Xilari do. Kain only chuckled. You worry too much. The pod slammed into the ground, dust and debris exploding around it. Silence. Then the hatch hissed open. Kain stepped out first, boots crunching against the cracked earth. Ziara followed, staring in awe. They had landed in what had once been a human city. Skyscrapers stood like broken teeth, vines crawling over steel and stone. The streets were empty, abandoned long ago. It was like walking through a graveyard. But there was something else. Something watching them. Kain's hand hovered over his weapon. We're not alone. Ziara turned, scanning the ruins. You think it's Xilari? Kain's smirk returned. I hope not. A shadow moved. Then, a voice, weak but human, echoed through the ruins. Identify yourself. Kain froze. Ziara's breath hitched. It was impossible. But then a figure stepped into the light. A human. Thin, battle-worn, dressed in patched-up armor that looked centuries old, but unmistakably human. Kain took a slow breath. His voice was steady. My name is Captain Dorian Kain. Terran Fleet. The survivor stared at him, eyes widening in disbelief. Then he whispered one word. Impossible. Humanity rises again. For the first time in 300 years, two humans stood face to face. Captain Dorian Kain felt the weight of history pressing down on him. The survivor before him, a man who had lived in the ruins of Earth for who knew how long, stared at him like he was a ghost. Ziara stood beside Kain, her alien features tense. The silence stretched between them, heavy with disbelief. Then the survivor finally spoke, his voice rough, filled with something between awe and suspicion. You're real. Kain gave a dry chuckle. So are you. The man took a cautious step forward. His armor was old, patched together with whatever scraps he could find, but his rifle was steady in his hands. His eyes, though sunken from hardship, still burned with something familiar. Survival. You said your name was Kain, the survivor asked. Kain nodded. Captain Dorian Kain, Terran Fleet. The man inhaled sharply. His fingers tightened around his rifle. Then he did something Kain never expected. He dropped to one knee. Captain Kain of the Resolute, the last captain of the Terran Fleet. Kain's stomach twisted. The way the man said it, like a legend, not a name. What the hell happened here? Kain asked. The survivor rose to his feet. You need to see for yourself. The last bastion. They followed the survivor through the ruins of the city. Ziara kept close to Kain, her sharp eyes scanning the shadows. The air was thick with the scent of dust and decay. But beneath it all, there was something else, the faint hum of power. Ziara whispered, There's technology running underground. The survivor glanced back at her, but didn't comment. He led them to what had once been a towering Terran military bunker, now covered in vines and rubble. He stepped forward, pressed his palm to an old scanner, and after a long pause, the doors rumbled open. Kain's breath caught. Inside, the darkness gave way to light. Rows of people stood within, hundreds of humans, battered but alive. Some wore old military uniforms, others had scavenged armor, but all of them looked at Kain the same way the first survivor had. Like they were seeing a legend come to life. A woman stepped forward, older than the others, her posture commanding. A scar ran across her cheek, and her sharp gray eyes locked onto Kain with a mix of caution and hope. "So," she said, crossing her arms, "the rumors were true." Kain raised an eyebrow. "What rumors?" She let out a slow breath. "For centuries, we thought the Resolute was gone. But there were whispers, stories passed down, saying one day a captain would return, one who never fell, one who would bring humanity back." Kain exhaled through his nose. "You make me sound like some kind of prophecy." The woman's lips curled slightly. "To us, you were." Zara looked between them, her voice low. "You've been here all this time, hiding." The woman's expression darkened, "Not hiding. Surviving." She motioned for them to follow. As they walked deeper into the bunker, the air grew colder, and the walls became lined with ancient data terminals, maps, and weapons. "We were left behind," the woman continued. "When the war ended, the auxiliary didn't just kill us. They wanted to erase us. They built that blockade station to ensure Earth was nothing more than a forgotten graveyard." Kain clenched his fists. "So why haven't they come down here and finished the job?" The woman smirked. "Because we made sure they couldn't." She stopped before a massive holographic display. It flickered to life, showing the Silari blockade above Earth. Red enemy ships hovered in formation, ensuring no one ever left or returned. "But they don't know everything," she continued. "They think we're scattered, weak, broken." Kain stepped closer to the display. "Are they right?" The woman's eyes burned with defiance. "No." She pressed a button, and the hologram shifted. A new image appeared, hidden Terran warships buried beneath the Earth's surface. Ancient weapons, powered down but still intact. A fleet, sleeping, waiting. "We've been preparing for this day for centuries," the woman said. "But what we needed was a leader." She turned to Kain. "You were the last captain of the Terran fleet. You woke up at the right time, Kain. Because the war isn't over." Kain looked at the ships, at the people. For 300 years, the auxiliary had believed humanity was dead, that their victory was complete. But here, beneath the ruins of a broken Earth, humanity had never surrendered. Kain turned to Zara. She met his gaze, understanding exactly what he was about to do. She exhaled. "You're really going to do this, aren't you?" Kain smirked. "I didn't come back just to run." Then he turned back to the crowd. "We take back our home," Kain said, his voice steady. "We make the auxiliary remember why they feared us." The room erupted in cheers. The last human had returned, and the war for Earth had begun.